Okay, quick show of hands here, and I kind of suspect that I'm going to get a lot of hands on this, but let's see. How many of you know who Rowan Atkinson is? A lot of you know who Rowan Atkinson is. Okay, that's good. I kind of thought I'd have a few more hands than I had, but all right. Most of you know who Rowan Atkinson is. He's a well-known British actor. Probably best known, depending on how many British TV shows you've watched, he would be best known as either Edmund Blackadder from the comedy Blackadder, or as the lovable but hapless Mr. Bean from the comedy of the same name. I loved Mr. Bean. Now, I was a huge fan of Mr. Bean. My favorite episode, I don't know how many of you watched the show, but my favorite episode was Mr. Bean in church. That was a funny, funny episode. If you ever get a chance to see it, you have to watch it. But I loved Mr. Bean. All of the shows were funny. The character, Mr. Bean, never spoke. See, they ruined the whole thing. They made a couple of Mr. Bean movies later, and they ruined the whole thing because they made him speak. And that just took away some of the fun of it. In the TV show, Mr. Bean never spoke. But Rowan Atkinson could have you almost on the floor laughing hysterically with his facial expressions and his physical comedy. He was a funny, funny actor. Still is, of course. Seems like the funniest guy in the world to watch him in Mr. Bean. A few years ago, I read an interview that he had given to an entertainment magazine at the height of his Mr. Bean fame. And he said to the interviewer that his reputation as a comedian was a problem for him. Get this, because he said he really wasn't a funny guy. Rowan Atkinson said, "It's a problem that people think of me as a comedian because I'm really not a funny guy." He said he didn't tell a lot of jokes. He wasn't the life of the party sort of person. Basically, what he said was that he takes his comedy very seriously. That was essentially what he was saying in the midst of the interview. I take my comedy very seriously. And the article included a photo of a very serious-looking Rowan Atkinson who didn't look at all like Mr. Bean, who looked serious and possibly even unhappy in the course, at least of that photo that accompanied the article. The point was that when he was being funny, and he could be very funny, Rowan Atkinson was putting on a performance. He wasn't being himself. There was a disconnect between the public and the private Rowan Atkinson. And it occurred to me that Christians can fall into the same trap. We come to church, or we do churchy sort of things during the week, and we look like the best and the most faithful Christians around. But what are we like when no one's looking, or when no one knows that we're Christians? Is this an act that we put on for human consumption? You know, do we just want people to look at us and think what good Christians they are when we're doing the church thing? Or is it something that takes over our lives and transforms how we behave? Does our faith in Jesus really make us change the way we live? Not only publicly, but also privately. It's a very sad fact that Christians have not always presented a very pretty picture to the world. We don't always put our best face forward, do we? All too often, we fail to show the beauty of love, the beauty of Christ, the holiness of God. And all too often, the end result of this is that the world turns away from us. They dismiss us as inauthentic at best or hypocrites at worst. It's all just an act. You don't really mean it. Why should we take you seriously? For the most part, the problem is not that we don't want people to know that we're Christians. That's part of it for some people, I suppose. The whole religion is a private thing, so keep it to yourself mentality does affect some people, some very faithful people, and probably makes them reluctant to talk about their faith, reluctant to show it too openly in how they live. But there are still a lot of people out there who are willing to publicly declare themselves to be faithful Christians, but who don't do such a good job of portraying it outside the church or the churchy things that they do. You know, over the 2,000 years that our faith has been in existence, people have done a whole lot of different things to publicly declare themselves to be Christians, not even revolving around the words we speak. We've come up with a lot of ways to declare ourselves to be Christians. This coming Wednesday, for example, is Ash Wednesday. Believe it or not, yes, Lent is almost here, which means spring is on the horizon. This coming Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. One of the traditions in a lot of churches on Ash Wednesday is that on the previous Palm Sunday, the palm leaves that are used in church are burned into ashes, and then the next year, those ashes get taken out, and at a special Ash Wednesday service that's usually held very early in the morning, people are invited forward at the end of the service to have the sign of the cross put visibly on their forehead with the leftover ashes from the year before. The point then is that you're supposed to leave that ash cross on your forehead for the rest of the day as a public sign of your faith in Jesus. So that's one example that's relevant for the time of year right now of how Christians can identify themselves as Christians. There are lots of other ways that we do it. Lots of people wear crosses. I wear a cross, usually in church, sometimes outside church. Unfortunately, so many people now wear crosses that I think the cross has become more of a fashion accessory than a sign of faith these days. There are people who wear special types of clothing. Think of the Amish, for example. So some people wear special types of clothing to tell us about their faith. Some people put bumper stickers on their car. You've probably seen those from time to time. Christian bumper stickers. There was a point in time when people even had special haircuts that would identify themselves as Christians. There have been all sorts of options over the centuries for how we publicly proclaim ourselves to be Christians. But what's the true mark of a Christian? We can use all the symbols that we want. We can come up with all the symbols we can think of. What's the true mark of a Christian? How do we really identify ourselves as Christians? In all honesty, those types of outward marks that I just spoke about, they really don't cut it. I mean, anyone can wear a cross. Anyone can put a bumper sticker on their car. What does any of that prove? What does any of that accomplish? I'm not knocking it. As I say, I wear a cross myself fairly regularly. But I'm just saying that fashion accessories or car accessories, these things aren't what our faith is all about. And yet, in spite of that, I'm wearing a cross at the moment. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, what Jesus would think of me or anyone else wearing a cross or of people putting bumper stickers on their car. I wonder if he might not be a little concerned that we were trying to draw attention to ourselves for being good Christians, rather than trying to do something constructive to actually demonstrate what a good Christian actually does and how a good Christian actually lives. Maybe Jesus would look at all these outer symbols that we use, and he would simply suggest that we stop trying to show off, and instead that we start trying to show others the love and the grace of God. I don't know. Jesus might not be all that pleased with the fact that the instrument of torture on which he died is now a fashion statement. Hard to say, isn't it? That might be why the earliest Christians didn't use the cross as a symbol of their faith. They used the fish most commonly. There were all sorts of other Christian symbols that were worn or used in artwork from the very early years. The dove was used, the ship was used, the lyre was used, there was an anchor and a lamb and a shepherd. You see all those things on ancient Christian art. wasn't until about 400 years after Christ's death that the cross really started to be used regularly. But whatever symbols we use, those aren't the things that count. There are both outward things and inward things that really show people the difference that Christ makes, that really show people what Christian faith is about. Jesus gave us one suggestion very clearly. John 13, verses 33 to 35, Jesus says, "My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Outwardly, the sign of Christian faith is not a cross or a bumper sticker or special clothing that we wear or anything like that. Those are meaningless. Those are fashion accessories or car accessories. Outwardly, love is the sign. In one way or another, that's been the focus of what I've been saying for the last few weeks leading up to the season of Lent. Love is the outward sign of a Christian. Love is the outward sign of a Christian's character. Jesus called love a command. Did you hear that? A new command I give you. Jesus called it a command. For a Christian, love is not an emotion that we feel for those we really, really like. That's not what it's about. It's a command. It's a way of life. It's the ultimate sign that we get the gospel and its message. It is something that is called forth from us and that just comes out of us no matter how we feel about the person in front of us. The gospel just brings it forth from us if we take the gospel seriously. Love is a command. Jesus tells us to love. It doesn't say anything about how we feel. He just says love. And this passage contains one of those very big little words that can tell us a great deal. So hear it again, just the last few words. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. The very big little word is if. There's an if involved in this that helps us to understand the significance of love being the main sign of a Christian community, the main sign of a Christian life. This is a command. It's one of the very few commands that Christ ever gave. This is what we are supposed to do as Christians. And although in this passage it's specifically talking about loving one another, so within the community, Christ also talked over and over again about loving our neighbor as well, loving those outside the community. It's a command. Because it's a command can be violated. It can be broken. We don't have to love. We don't have to. I know a lot of Christians. They don't come across as very loving. But the point is that love is the ultimate sign of our faithfulness, at least the ultimate outward sign of our faithfulness. Let's push it a step farther. Is visible obedience to a command enough of a witness to our character? And here, I think, is where Paul was going in the passage Hummy read for us from 1 Corinthians. Think about the last few words of that reading. Judge nothing, Paul wrote, before the appointed time. Don't look at a person and judge them because you don't really know what's going on inside. You can only see what's going on the outside. So judge nothing before the appointed time. Don't assume anything. Judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. It's not a threat. Paul finishes by talking about the fact that everybody will receive their praise from God. He's not making a threat. He's just saying, don't make a judgment about another person's faith or lack of faith or whatever it is, because all you're seeing is what's going on outside. You don't know what's in here. You don't know what's in their heart. A few days ago, I read these words. The true mark of a Christian's character is how a Christian behaves when no one is watching. The true mark of a Christian's character is how a Christian behaves when no one is watching. Or maybe you could say, the true mark of a Christian's character is how a Christian behaves when no one knows that you're a Christian. I've been in situations where people don't know I'm a Christian. I go on vacation somewhere, I'm hanging out with people that I've met on vacation. I really don't make a habit of saying, oh yes, I'm a Christian and a minister, and who wants to get into that? It's a vacation. How do I behave? How do I behave when the people around me don't know I'm a Christian? That's the true mark of a Christian character, isn't it? Because real faithfulness and real character isn't measured by how we act when we're in the presence of others. Because anyone can put on an act. Rowan Atkinson can be funny even though he's not funny, according to himself. Anyone can look good. Anyone can put on a performance. The real test of our faithfulness, the real test of our character, is what we do when we don't put on that act, when people don't know that we're Christians. Do we still behave like those who love others and like those who follow Christ? That's where the rubber hits the road. When it's just between me and God, and nobody else knows, do I still choose the way of Jesus? That's when it counts. That's the true mark of anyone's Christian character. When it's just between you and God, do you still choose the way of Jesus? Even when no one's looking, even when no one knows. Is there anything hidden in the darkness of secrecy that would call our motives into question? I don't know, because it's secret. I don't know. But sometimes I think we all need to take a look at our lives, don't we? And we need to ask ourselves, am I really showing Jesus? Even in those times when no one knows, am I still living the way Jesus wants me to live? That is the true mark of our character. I want to believe that we are all people of good character. And we thank God, don't we? Because sometimes when we slip up, God gives us a fresh start. But let's not make it an act. Let's not make it a performance. Let's make our faith a way of life. Let's live the way Jesus wants us to live. Praise be to God.